The day I received the keys to a 2,500-acre valley from my late grandfather's estate, a woman in a red blazer stepped in front of my truck at the gate and said, "You have no right to be here." Behind her stood razor wire fencing, no trespassing signs, and an entire residential community of 340 homes built on my land. The HOA loudspeaker crackled like the siren of a self-appointed government. I said nothing. I looked at her, then down at the folder in my hands, and understood one thing immediately. I was going to need a far better lawyer than she had ever been. Let's get into what happened next, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I read every single one. The drive into Clearwater Valley followed a 2-lane county road through scrub oak and limestone hills. I made it with the windows down, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on a manila folder stamped by the Delving County Land Records Office. Inside was the deed to parcel CV 187. Total, 2,514.7 acres, transferred by lawful inheritance from the estate of Harold Eugene Brooks to Matthew Allen Brooks. My grandfather had bought the valley in the 1960s, back when it was open grassland and old-growth pine. I'd only visited twice as a child, but I was a geodetic engineer by trade. I read land records the way other people read novels, slowly, skeptically, always looking for what didn't fit. The first thing I noticed was the sign. Half hidden in the grass on the roadside was an old oak plank. Clearwater Valley, private property of H.E. Brooks. But right beside it stood a newer sign, navy blue, polished, embossed with a stylized tree logo. Clearwater Valley Residential Community managed by CVHOA. They hadn't removed the old sign. They had pinned it down with the new one. At the gate, 2 uniformed guards took my certified deed copy and radioed someone inside. 3 minutes later, a white SUV rolled up with practiced precision. That was my first meeting with Donna Strickland. 58 years old, platinum hair, burgundy blazer, the kind of expressionless face that had spent years practicing power. She looked me over, introduced herself as president of the Clearwater Valley HOA board, and said, "I'd recommend you turn around. That piece of paper you're carrying doesn't mean what you think it means out here." Then she handed me a bound document. It was labeled the Clearwater Valley Long-Term Management Agreement, executed in 2013. According to Donna, it gave CVHOA full operational, developmental, and infrastructure rights over the entire parcel for 99 years. "You inherited a title on paper," she said. "We hold everything that title is worth." Then she turned and walked away. I sat there at the gate and opened the document. My grandfather's signature was on it. At least it looked like his signature. Harold Brooks had written his name the same way for decades, strong, squared, steady. This version had something different in it. Hesitation, tremor, interrupted pressure. I'd seen enough handwriting and legal records to know when something was wrong. I didn't argue at the gate. I didn't make a scene. I simply told Donna I'd need a few days to review the material. She nodded once and said, "Take all the time you need. We've been through this before." That line stayed with me. We've been through this before. I drove away and wrote down 3 questions. Was this agreement registered with the state? Did Harold have legal capacity when he signed it? And was the attorney involved still licensed? 4 days later, I was renting a room above a hardware store in downtown Delving when 3 express envelopes arrived within 2 hours. That wasn't coincidence. That was choreography. The first was from Harrove and Strickland LLP, threatening me with civil liability if I continued interfering with CVHOA management rights. The second was from the HOA itself, accusing me of violating 7 community rules during my 11-minute visit to the gate, including disrupting residential security operations and distributing unauthorized materials, by which they meant handing over a copy of my own deed. The third was worse. It was a screenshot from the community's social media page. Donna had posted a warning about a suspicious individual falsely claiming ownership of the land and urged residents to report any contact with him. There were more than 140 comments. Grifter, fraudster, threat. I photographed every page, then went back to the first letter and checked the attorney's state bar number. Suspended since 2021. R. Harrove had been signing legal threats while unauthorized to practice law. I wrote an asterisk next to his name and kept going. On day 6, I went to the county records office to request the original survey plat. The clerk recognized my name immediately. She leaned forward and lowered her voice. "Mr. Brooks, I want to help you," she said, "but Donna Strickland and the county recorder have known each other for 12 years. If I pull anything on this parcel, she may know before you leave the building." That told me everything I needed to know. The county level was compromised. That night, my cousin Carol called. Someone had phoned her mother and claimed I was under investigation for falsifying inheritance paperwork. They warned that if the family kept supporting me, they'd all be reported to the state fraud unit. When I hung up, I spread every document across the floor and drew a diagram, Donna at the center. From her name, I drew 4 lines: the HOA, the law firm, the county office, and the community itself. This wasn't just an HOA with delusions of authority. It was a closed system. Legal pressure, social pressure, institutional pressure, financial pressure. A machine built to exhaust anyone who challenged it. I wrote one sentence under the diagram: to dismantle a system, you build a larger one. I left Delvin and drove to Austin, where Donna Strickland's name meant nothing, and the law operated at a scale she couldn't casually control. I rented a desk in a shared workspace, laid out every document I had, and called a lawyer named Evelyn Shaw. Evelyn had spent 22 years in Texas property law and had built a reputation taking apart HOA overreach. She gave me 40 minutes. I used every one of them. When I finished, she said, "I need the version of that agreement filed with the Texas Secretary of State's Long-Term Property Agreement Registry. Under Texas law, if a land use agreement runs longer than 10 years, it has to be registered with the state. If it isn't, it doesn't bind an heir." I asked what happened if it had never been filed. She looked at me and said, "Then, as a matter of law, it doesn't exist." While her office submitted the registry inquiry, I called Carol and asked her to search 2 storage trunks our grandfather had kept for decades in the back of his workshop. 3 days later, they arrived. Inside were the load-bearing pieces of the case. First, a 1961 Bureau of Land Management survey map showing the original valley boundaries exactly as my grandfather had acquired them. Second, a typed letter from Harold Brooks to the county land office in November 2012, 14 months before the supposed agreement, flatly declining any cooperative land management proposal from CVHOA. His language was precise. He was not interested. He did not want to be contacted again. Third, medical records from April 2013 showing early cognitive decline, 3 months before the agreement was signed. Then Evelyn's registry response came back. No matching records found. The so-called long-term management agreement had never been registered, which meant it carried no binding authority over me as heir. In plain English, the entire foundation of Clearwater Valley HOA's control over my land was legally void. Now we had 3 facts. The agreement wasn't registered, my grandfather's legal capacity at the time was challengeable, and the attorney behind the threats was suspended. I asked Evelyn what we still needed. She answered in 3 seconds. "We need Donna to confirm the document is real, on record, in front of witnesses. That's when it becomes a trap." The next warning came from inside the community. A resident named Rick Danver emailed me anonymously. He'd been unhappy with the HOA for years. His message was short. "Donna knows you hired outside counsel. Emergency board meeting last night. She plans to handle this permanently." Not long after, my landlady in Delvin called in tears. A woman had threatened her, saying if she continued renting to me, she could be named in a real estate fraud case. Donna hadn't come after me directly. She'd gone after someone softer. Then Carol called again. A hand-delivered envelope had been left on her mother's porch. Inside was a color satellite photo of the house with a handwritten note. "Tell your nephew to walk away before this becomes something none of us can take back." That was the moment the case changed for me. Up to then, I wanted my land back. Now I wanted criminal referrals, document fraud, witness intimidation, misappropriation of funds. Evelyn warned me that once we widened the scope, there would be no pulling back. I told her to call the FBI. Around the same time, Rick Danver made his choice. He agreed to cooperate and handed over 2 documents he'd kept for years. The first was a set of handwritten board minutes from 2013. Beside Harold's name was a note. Harold signed. He didn't fully follow the content. That's fine. The second was an internal email chain showing Donna directing HOA payments to Harrove and Strickland LLP, disguised as special administrative fees instead of legal expenses. Total over 6 years. $287,400 taken from resident dues never disclosed. At that point, the strategy became precise. Evelyn built it like a controlled demolition. 3 pressure points activated at once. First, the bank. Pinnacle Federal held mortgages on 218 homes inside. Clearwater Valley. Evelyn showed them the registry finding and asked a simple question. If CVHOA's management authority was never legally valid, Then who exactly held enforceable control over the land securing all those loans? The bank requested a private meeting within 48 hours. Their exposure was massive. Second, the insurer. The HOA's policies had been written on the assumption that CVHOA was the lawful land manager. Once that assumption collapsed, the insurer suspended coverage pending review. Third, federal presence. Special Agent Patricia Mercer of the FBI agreed to attend the next community meeting in plain clothes. The pressure worked immediately. Donna called an emergency community-wide meeting for the following Wednesday. The Clearwater Valley Community Center seated 400. By 6:45 that evening, it was nearly full. I arrived early, sat in the middle section, and carried a brown accordion folder on my lap. Rick was 4 rows behind me. Agent Mercer stood near the back. A local reporter sat near the side exit with a recorder. Donna walked to the podium at exactly 7 o'clock, dressed in charcoal, pearls, and absolute confidence. She framed the bank and insurance concerns as outside misinformation designed to destabilize a successful community. Then a resident in the 5th row stood up, exactly as planned, and asked whether the long-term management agreement had in fact been properly filed with the state, because his mortgage servicer was asking. Donna answered without hesitation. "Of course it was," she said. "That agreement was executed according to every applicable requirement. I personally oversaw the process in my capacity as a licensed attorney, and every procedural step was completed in full." That was the detonation, because all 3 parts of that statement were false. The agreement had not been registered. She was no longer a licensed attorney, and the procedures had not been lawfully completed. I didn't say a word. I simply opened my folder to the Secretary of State response and angled it toward the podium. From 15 feet away, Donna saw the words, "No record found." For the first time since I met her, her expression slipped. Only for a second, but it was enough. The reporter saw it. The FBI agent saw it, and the recorder caught every word. The courtroom hearing took place the next Monday. By then, the story had spread beyond delving. Residents filled the gallery. Bank representatives were there. Reporters were there. Rick was there. Donna arrived with a new attorney, Leonard Bass, who looked like a man who had accepted the case before fully understanding what was in it. Evelyn's first move was simple and devastating. She placed the HOA's management agreement beside the certified registry response from the Secretary of State. No matching record found for parcel CV-187. Then she cited Texas property law. An unregistered long-term land agreement does not bind a lawful successor. Bass objected. Overruled. Next came a forensic document examiner who compared my grandfather's signature on the agreement to a dozen verified samples from prior years. The authentic signatures were stable, confident, structurally consistent. The one on the agreement showed interrupted pressure, compressed forms, and drift consistent with cognitive decline. Then the medical records went in April 2013, early cognitive impairment. Bass objected again. Overruled again. Then Evelyn played the audio from the community meeting. Donna's own voice filled the courtroom. "Every applicable requirement satisfied. I personally oversaw the process in my capacity as a licensed attorney." When the audio ended, Evelyn introduced the Texas State Bar record showing Donna Strickland's law license had been withdrawn years earlier. This time, Bass didn't even object. Rick Danver took the stand next. He presented the internal HOA emails and the concealed legal payments, $287,400 funneled out of resident dues without disclosure or board approval. By the time he stepped down, everyone in the gallery understood what Clearwater Valley had actually been. Not a lawful community government, a private scheme. Then Judge Castellano looked at the defense table and asked whether they had responsive evidence. Bass was silent, not for 1 second, for 3. And in a courtroom, 3 seconds can sound like collapse. The civil ruling came 4 days later. The court declared the 2013 management agreement void in its entirety. Clearwater Valley HOA had no legal authority to manage, occupy, charge fees on, or exercise control over my land. The court also ordered financial remedies. All management fees collected during the HOA's unauthorized operation, $4.1 million, were to be returned. The law firm's legal registration was revoked. Donna's personal assets were frozen pending criminal proceedings. Then the criminal side moved. Donna faced forgery charges for the fraudulent land instrument, witness tampering charges for the threats made to my landlady and Carol's family, and mail fraud tied to legal correspondence sent under suspended credentials. Harrow faced separate charges for unauthorized practice of law. The structure that had taken more than a decade to build was coming apart piece by piece. On the day enforcement began, I drove out before sunrise and parked on the county road shoulder near the old oak sign. Sheriff's vehicles arrived at 7:45 a.m. The gate opened under a deputy's key. The private guards stepped aside. HOA offices were sealed, records were boxed, accounts remained frozen under court control, and not long after, Donna Strickland left the courthouse in handcuffs. No board members beside her, no legal letterhead protecting her, no SUV waiting. Just the consequences of a system that had finally lost the ability to lie for itself. But the hardest part came after the victory because the law was clear. The ethics were harder. 340 families had bought homes there in good faith. They had raised children there, paid mortgages there, planted gardens there. They were not Donna Strickland. They were the people she had used, and I had no interest in turning them into collateral damage. So 2 weeks after the enforcement order, I stood at the same podium in the same community center and told them the truth. I was not there to remove them. I was there to offer a lawful future. With Evelyn's help, we drafted the Clearwater Valley Land Use Agreement of 2024. It gave every existing household a 50-year residential ground lease at a fixed annual rate that could rise no more than 2% per year. And on average, that rate was about 40% lower than what the HOA had been charging in dues. The $4.1 million restitution fund would be distributed to residents based on years of occupancy and documented payments. An elected resident council, not an appointed board, would oversee shared infrastructure with audited financials published annually. And every page of that agreement would be filed properly with the state. No sealed portfolios, no shadow documents, no private version and public version. Rick Danver was elected the first council chair. The morning after the new agreement was executed and filed, I drove into the valley by the old Eastern Access Road my grandfather had graded by hand in the 1960s. I stopped where the original oak sign still leaned near the fence line. I lifted it, cleaned the dirt from the carved letters, and set it back upright in its original post hole. Clearwater Valley, private property of H. Brooks. I didn't replace it with anything newer. It didn't need replacing. That afternoon, I sat on the steps of the small house my grandfather had built in 1963 and got a message from Evelyn. Court has confirmed full CVLUA 2024. You are officially on record as landowner. I read it once, put the phone away, and listened to the wind in the pines. And that, in the end, is the real lesson here. This was never only a property dispute. It was a case study in how illegitimate power survives. Donna Strickland didn't just take land. She built a maze around it: documents, social pressure, institutional relationships, legal intimidation, internal rules that referred back to themselves until challenging her felt more exhausting than surrendering. That is how unjust power works. It makes understanding the truth feel more expensive than walking away from it. And the answer wasn't greater force. It was better questions. Is the agreement registered? Was the signer competent? Is the lawyer licensed? 3 questions. Public records, honest answers, and the entire structure came down. The second lesson is that documents rarely lie if you know how to read them. Nearly every piece of evidence that ended Donna Strickland's operation was sitting in plain sight. State registry records, bar status records, family archives, meeting minutes, medical records, recorded statements. No miracle witness, no dramatic confession, no last-minute twist. Just patience, organization, and the refusal to let paperwork intimidate you. And the final lesson is about ownership. My grandfather left me 2,500 acres of Texas land. He also left, unintentionally, 340 families living on it in good faith. Real ownership isn't the right to do anything you can. It's the responsibility to deal honestly with everything your ownership touches. Donna believed control and ownership were the same thing. She spent 11 years proving they were not, because in the end, ownership didn't look like a blazer, a sealed document, or a gate on stolen authority. It looked like restoring what was true, protecting the innocent, and standing on land that had been held honestly from the start. That's what real power looks like. If this story hit home for you, let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and stick around, because the next one might hit even harder.